money isn't something physical, it's really just a promise to pay, right? So from that time on, late 1600s, 1700s, you start getting the expansion of credit based on still this idea that gold and silver are real money, right? And not the only actual money, but no one knew exactly how much credit was being created, right? Except probably for the bankers. But then notes start to circulate, which was basically still representation of a coin. Today we no longer have that system. That system ended in 1971 with President Nixon going off the gold standard. And when that happened, we basically moved to a fiat currency system. Now, most people are under the impression that government creates the money. And that's kind of true for most nations in the sense that they're generally responsible for coinage and notes, but that's about 3% of the money supply. And it's been shrinking kind of ever since, and we're going to increasingly digital forms of currency and so on. So the majority of money that's actually created is created as debt when banks make loans. Now, why don't you learn, if you take Economics 101, where money comes from? That should be number one. It's such a central institution of our civilizational order. Everybody should know where it comes from, right? And that the powerful over time have been able to disguise that from everybody is really just evidence of their power, I think. Should, 1% of people, so whoever owns the major banks here in Australia, they're the ones who benefit from all the interest, right? We're an interest farm for them, right? But until the population knows that, they know it in their heart of hearts when they pay interest payments and so on their credit card bills or homes and so on. But they are generally under the impression that either the government is this, creating the money, or the banks are just intermediaries. That is to say, there's little grandma saver over here who's been saving her whole life, and the bank just finds a borrower over here and moves that money, and maybe it gives old granny 3% interest, but charges 6% interest to, the person with the mortgage, right? But that's not how it works at all. It's just invented digits in a computer right now. Once we realize that money is effectively created out of thin air, so this argument with the politicians, say, well, okay, we just can't do this, right, because we don't have the money. Well, turns out you actually can. That money is just an IOU, and we can create kind of as much of it as we want, granted within limits of resources, controlling for inflation, things like that.
Customers are at a disadvantage to start because they have been led to trust the banks as professionals, so that they are being treated, the person opposite them on the desk is both professional, competent and ethical, whereas they're none of those things following deregulation. They're complicity and indeed the corruption of the legal profession and indeed some judges. But more deeply, it's a problem of the adversarial system under the British common law, which we inherited. And that's all based on the law of contract, in which the two parties are deemed to be equal. But the one party, the victim, has nothing because it's all been taken, and the bank has considerable resources and has bought up the legal profession. Authorities emphasise that, the Treasury, bureaucracy, the financial journalists, this notion that what's most important is the stabilisation of the banking system. And whether even explicitly or implicitly, the authorities are prepared to sacrifice all the victims for the sake of maintaining the stability of the banking system, which means the profits of the Big Four in Australia.
Those people who are at the bottom rungs of society, let's say, or kind of lower socioeconomic status, who to live kind of a middle class or semi-middle class life, do get these credit cards, and to the bank, credit's their main product. That's how they make their profit, right? By giving out loans or credit cards and so on. Now, credit cards obviously have very, very high interest rates relative to, say, a mortgage rate and so on. And then people get into trouble, right? So all of a sudden, if you're making a small salary and the bank gives you a $10,000 credit card and you go out on a spending spree, maybe it's just to keep up with the middle class, maybe it's to fix your car because you've got to get to work, whatever it is, and then you get into trouble. It's no surprise really to find that these institutions are the most heavily capitalized on the planet. That is to say, have as a collective whole the largest capitalization, the largest market value, because they have ongoing profit streams which are almost never damaged, because we always need money in the economy, right? You've got the television adverts now. Are you in debt trouble? Call us. We'll help you get your credit rating back, help you pay down your debt. And then there's, of course, all those payday loan things that are kind of springing up. So when you see that and consultancies about debt, you know that we're kind of spiraling out of control on some level, and that ultimately it's the ones who are at have lesser income that are in greater trouble on some level. Yeah.
The existing second tier, I think the evidence is that there's only a handful of them. Bendigo Bank, Suncorp, Bank of Queensland's more or less irrelevant. The evidence is they've started to copy the same nasty practices of the Big Four, as I said in the article, because they've seen that the Big Four can get away with it. And it's really pernicious, because the Bendigo Bank has promised, we're your local community bank, blah, 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 but they're very nasty, yeah.
I'm under the impression that if we live in democracies, that the people should be in control of the money supply. Now, private social forces have feared this for a long time, because the idea was, well, if we elect these guys and they have control of the quote-unquote printing press, they're just going to buy society all these goodies, so that they'll get re-elected and so on. I'm in favor of kind of regaining control over the money supply, and have some sort of institution or council that would be responsible. So you wouldn't want to flood the economy, because the risk there is inflation. But nobody really knows what that target would be. So just for an example right now, let's say we did have control of the money supply, and I don't know, maybe we wanted a new hospital, right? And currently under the budget, the way it works now, they might say, oh, well, we don't have the money, because they really don't, because they're dependent on revenue and tax fines and fees. Otherwise, they have to borrow. So in our system, governments, our very own democratic governments, are forced to borrow from private market forces. So if you had some sort of democratically elected institution, and there was a clear agenda, right, for this year, this is how much we're going to put in the economy for these projects, that could work, right? And you could, of course, always monitor inflation and go, okay, well, prices are going up in this, that, or the other thing. We need to maybe restrict the money supply and so on.
Bring back some public banks is the first thing I'd do. Publicly owned banks existed historically precisely because there was a recognition by governments that the private sector did not cater to certain sectors of the economy, the lesser privileged, at all, or on the right terms. So one thing I will, for as a positive note, is that I think the privatisation of those public banks has been a disaster, and but how you reconstruct that, I don't know. But there is a place for publicly owned banks. Some countries retain publicly owned banks, but the Commonwealth Bank in particular was established to fill in the gaps, the so-called People's Bank, and also in its behaviour to keep the private banks honest. Well, since privatisation, it's been caught up in the same kind of undesirable activity, indeed corrupt activity. They have to be taught to keep their spirits up and get on the web and expose in some way, farmers have been able to do this through farming sites and expose their problem to get some kind of a broader community support. Yeah. Try everything.